Give me a little intro there, Gomer.
There's no turning back now.
Let's put on the show.
You're listening to the Station 71 podcast. My name is Mario, and this week I'm joined by my co-hosts,
Beth?
And Brian.
So we've got a fun topic this week, but we have a little bit of news to catch up on after taking a week off. That's usually the the standard, but let's dive right into it. We've got Festival of the Lion King returning this summer at Disney's Animal Kingdom with some big news. We talked about some budget cuts and entertainment cuts, but it looks like Disney's bringing back the fan favorite Festival of the Lion King.
Yay.
I'm excited, and I feel like this is one that we kind of speculated would be back too. We kind of figured.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm just glad to see it, slowly but surely returning to normalcy.
Yeah, and like you said, this makes a lot of sense. So this is a huge crowd eater. Everybody wants to go see this, so it's pretty obvious that this would be one of the first ones they want to bring back.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are worried about the COVID restrictions and whatnot, it looks like they are testing different ways to make the show more friendly to the newer restrictions. In this article, it also states when it returns, Festival of the Lion King will be presented in a modified format to be mindful of the current environment. There will be adjustments to the show on stage and backstage, including updates to choreography to allow appropriate physical distancing, which is great. That's it looks like to me they have done or are done or are doing the proper planning to make things come back to normal, and I'm happy about that.
Yeah, for sure.
Next up, we've got another interesting Animal Kingdom story. The Rivers of Light animal floats have been gutted and removed from Disney's Animal Kingdom. A while ago, some of the Rivers of Light floats, that is weirdly tongue twistery, were spotted backstage in a marina at Animal Kingdom, but it looks like now they've officially been gutted and removed from the vicinity, so it's officially dead.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of thinking that they were going to do something with these, maybe the show didn't work, but maybe they would bring parts of it back to a new show. I think this time they've just decided, no, it's done.
Yeah, that's pretty sad because I know that the show got a lot of hate, but the floats were still very beautiful. It feels like they could have done something.
The weird part of all of that to me is there are parts of the show that were good, but they're the parts that Disney never wanted to do anything with. So next news story we have on here is that the France Pavilion's expansion is starting to open up to the public. As of, I think, 3 days ago, it looked, as at the time of recording this, of course, they've opened up a section of the new section of France Pavilion, partly that the archway to Ratatouille goes to. They've also opened the new bathrooms in the France Pavilion, but overall it looks nice. I just feel like we're, I guess, that much closer to Remy opening up.
It's exciting.
When do you guys think that'll open?
I think honestly a lot of it is going to depend on kind of nationally how COVID's looking as they get closer to it, I think that if COVID is still taking a lot of business away from Disney, that they're going to want something to bring that crowd in, or bring more people in if, it's really eating into attendance, and maybe something like this is the answer.
Yeah, I wonder if they'll kind of make it coincide with Flower and Garden,
Hmm.
you know, so that people are like, "Oh, well, I could go for Flower and Garden and the new thing just opened." 'Cause it's done, dude. It's like I actually got the chance to walk back there on Tuesday, and you can't see much because they have like this barricade up, and like the part where the little crepe restaurant and the attraction itself are going to be, but like you could kind of see over it, and it looks like it's completely done.
There's aerial photos in the article I linked in the show notes. You could see right over those walls. There's ground there. It's not like the standard dirt, at the foot of a construction wall type of thing. I don't think we're far off at all. I think we're incredibly close.
Yeah, it's just like finishing details at this point.
Well, and I know that they've been bringing people to the attraction. Like people have gone in there and seen the attraction, so we can't be that far off.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm hoping it'll be open optimistically within the next 2 months.
I do think it's funny that the new bathrooms are open, and that's like a thing that people are like, well, let me go walk down here and see it, and then we can, see the new bathrooms. The bathrooms are literally it's the very last thing. Like you have to walk all the way to the back. So if you just as a word to the wise, if you're going to Epcot anytime soon, go ahead and use the bathroom somewhere else because it's not convenient.
Honestly, a lot of the bathrooms in World Showcase are like that, where they are not very out in the open and hidden back in the back of pavilions.
Yeah, for sure. Germany is my recommended because it's right there on the pathway, and it's pretty good spot almost in the middle.
Good old Germany.
Good old Germany.
While we're on the topic of bathroom news, I didn't throw this in there, but did you see that they closed the bathrooms in Morocco for refurbishment after they opened the ones in France?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's good is like because if you have to use it and then you walk past it, you see that those bathrooms aren't available, you can keep walking or whatever. But
they're
yeah,
on
like
opposite
I said,
ends of World Showcase. That's the like.
Oh wow, you're right.
But that's the part that got me is like, it's okay. So they opened one, but they closed another.
Yeah, I didn't.
They're on the opposite ends of the park.
No, they're not. No, they're not. They're right beside each other.
Are they?
Morocco and France?
Am I like imagining this? Maybe I'm totally
Yeah,
wrong.
no, they're like right next to each other. I was like very confused for a second because I was like, really? But then I realized, yeah, they're right next to each other.
Okay. I don't know where the bathrooms are in Morocco either. So
that I don't know. I don't remember using the bathroom in Morocco, but
I don't remember where they're at, but I'm actually curious about this refurbishment because I remember they had really cool tile work on the inside. So
hopefully it's just a refresh and they don't take away the cool parts.
Have we reached rock bottom of Disney news when we're talking about bathroom refurbishments?
I guess so. Here, I'll send you the news article for this one too, since we brought it up. Well, the last two news stories that we have in here, I feel like go hand in hand. Now that we've talked about the things that Disney is giving us, we're going to talk about the things that Disney's taking away from us. We've kind of missed these a little bit on the point of covering them as they were coming out, but it looks like Disney has now canceled extra magic hours and replaced them with early theme park entry. This is kind of it's a double-edged sword one because there's a lot of talk about like what the pros and cons are here. Now extra magic hours were, if you don't know, the scheduled times where resort guests could go in before anybody else. So either you were staying later or coming in early, but it was all at Disney's discretion when they would extend them. Now, it's also the possibility of extending them anywhere from like an hour to 3 hours. So that's where the big perk for extra magic hours was. Now, Disney's replacement for that is later in 2021. Disney's going to roll out early theme park entry for hotel guests, which means 30-minute or early access to any theme park of the guests choosing on any day. Which in theory should give guests more flexibility. Thoughts?
I think the fact that they're extending it to all of the parks is the only pro of this change. Like
Yes.
extra magic hours, it was like at least an hour, sometimes up to 3 hours of extra park time you got as a resort guest. 30 minutes? What is that going to do?
Right. And for me, this is the thing that gets me is I feel like they've been slowly pulling extra magic hours away for a long time, right? Like you
Yeah.
even said it sometimes was 3 hours, but that wasn't the recent case. I feel like every time I've been to Disney in the last 2 years, it's been like an hour at most. Sometimes 2. I think Magic Kingdom would still get the 2 hours extended time. But I remember when they were rolling this out and this was the big thing, it was like you could stay in Magic Kingdom till like 2 a.m. And that's like every kid's dream. I feel like it's so, I don't know. I hate that they're getting rid of that.
Yeah. I don't like it either. It's just I feel like they're taking away more and more value from staying on property.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to touch that with the next news story too. Before we bounce off of that, the other thing that I find weird about this is that it's only, I guess it's not super weird, but it's only early morning access, right? Like extra magic hours is great for people that are willing to stay up and want to do the parks at night. And honestly, I like the parks better at night. I feel like they look better at night. Now Disney's totally doing away with that, and you only have the early morning access.
Well, okay. To counter that point just a little bit, though, I would say in recent years, it feels like the main draw of doing extra magic hours was to get into the first rush for e-ticket attractions.
That's
So
true.
I think that more people would be upset by having that option taken away from them.
I just feel like if they're gonna do a half hour in the morning, what's a half hour at night? Like, give
Oh
me
yeah,
both.
definitely. Yeah. But I'm just saying if they had to pick one,
Yeah.
the 30-minute slot in the morning, if they didn't have that at all, I think people would be up in arms about it. I mean, there are a lot of people already up in arms about this, but even more so.
Yeah. I feel like there was something else that I wanted to say on this topic, but I'm still like just so upset about this. This one hurts the most.
Yeah, this is just a big bummer to people like me who don't like getting up early, especially on vacation. So it was always very nice to just be able to wake up at, noon and then head over to Epcot and just stay until like 10 or 11 at night.
Yeah.
But
I will say, like, to play devil's advocate too, I feel like, and I don't know if this is really playing devil's advocate here, I feel like a lot of times I would use extra magic hours to tell me where not to go too. Like if
Yep.
I saw there was a half hour or an hour Magic Kingdom extra magic hour, I wasn't going there because everybody else was. Like
Oh, for
that's
sure.
yeah,
As an
for
annual
the
pass
morning at
holder,
least.
yeah.
like we would always check like what day are we going? Okay, make sure we don't go to this park on extra magic hours because we couldn't take advantage of them. So yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean like that, I don't know. That makes sense, but I also feel like now it's just kind of a crapshoot. Like, yeah, okay, there is the Disney like planning structure that you have to go through to get into a park, but like, why go through all that hassle? I don't know. This
Well,
eliminates a lot of the spontaneousness of planning too. I feel like.
I agree. I think right now, though, this is also kind of a way for them to combat having one large crowd at one park and have it spaced more equally across all four parks.
Yeah. I will say I do agree with that. And I feel like if it stays outside of COVID restrictions, that's where I'm gonna be really upset. I think for
Oh,
right
yeah,
now in the
agree.
current climate, this is fine. Like it's not great, but also like there is no way that they can do extra magic hours feasibly with how they're planning things, with how everything's working. It's just not, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But if Disney doesn't come back with any sort of like extra magic hour-esque incentive that's not this, that's when I'll be really upset. Now, to add to that, another perk that they're taking away from Disney resorts is the Magical Express transportation. So I'm the only one that really uses this, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess a rundown of what Magical Express is, because we haven't really talked about that too much either. So Magical Express was the free transportation that you would get from the airport to your hotel room. Perks of taking Magical Express were you had dedicated transport. You didn't have to worry about having or getting a car from the airport. And then on top of that, you also got your luggage transported directly from the airport to your hotel room. And the perk of that was that you didn't have to go wait by the baggage claim. It would come off of your airport. It would be tagged for the Disney Magical Express, and then they would transport it from the airport to your hotel room. So lots of big pluses for people that are flying in from other states. Now that said, this news story came out probably sometime mid last week ish. And it's kind of weird because there's no sort of replacement announced. The weird thing for me is that, like, obviously this is a huge perk of staying on property for somebody that's coming in doing the once in a lifetime vacation, also somebody that's not going to have a car. But Disney hasn't said what they're planning to do and how this is going to be changed once, it goes away. Like, are they going to make people rent a car? Are you going to have to get a taxi from the airport to Disney? Like, those are the things that I
Yeah.
worry about as a person that's not, doesn't usually have a car on property.
Right. And I always drive, so this is a non-issue for me, but I can definitely see why so many people are up in arms about it. And there's been a lot of, I feel like, unnecessary backlash against people that are upset about it going away. Like, I mean, if you go to New York City, it's not like you get free shuttle to your from the airport to your hotel. And it's like, okay, but no one ever expected that in New York City.
Yeah.
This was a thing that people have been doing for years and years and years at Disney, and the expectation was already in existence, and now they're taking it away without any feasible or foreseeable replacement.
Yeah. And
So
the other thing of it is too, I mean, I guess you can make the comparison. The closest thing to comparison is Universal, and Universal doesn't necessarily have a system like this. Like when we went to Universal, we had to actually get a transport from the airport to Universal. But like you said, Universal never offered this. And it feels like now more than ever, Disney has become comparable to Universal. Like, especially with all of the perks that they're taking away from the parks.
yeah, and I mean at this point, Universal is much less expensive to go to. So I feel like Disney's gonna eventually start seeing the repercussions of what they're doing now because of that.
I hope so. At this point, I've said it a couple times in other places. I feel like if I want to go to Disney at this point, there is nothing but the Disney bubble keeping me in Disney, right? Like, what is the point of staying at even a moderate resort? What's the point of staying at a moderate resort besides the atmosphere and the fact that you're in the Disney bubble and you get transportation to the Disney parks? Some of the good neighbor resorts get transportation to Disney parks, and they're probably priced less too.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Even the not good neighbor resorts, like some of them, the ones outside of property, have transportation to the parks. It's not very good usually. It's like you can go at 8 a.m. or 2 p.m. It's not like Disney's transportation where it comes every 20 minutes or so, but still exists.
Yeah.
If you plan it right, you could save yourself a ton of money and still have the time of your life by not staying on property.
I feel like at some point we have to kind of look over what the pros and cons of staying on on property are again, because we did that a while ago, And I
Mhm.
feel like it's such a different environment now than it was when we recorded that episode.
Yeah.
Oh, very different.
And I mean,
I would say right now the only real like benefit to staying, it's like it depends on the resort, whether or not you're actually getting a benefit. Like I feel like Skyliner is a pretty good benefit because it is nonstop, it just keeps going and you can just jump on it whenever. And the ones around Epcot that you can walk to Epcot. But other than that, if you're not going to stay in one of those, or obviously the monorail resorts, if you're not planning on staying in one of those, then why?
yeah.
You know, why stay at a resort where you have to take a bus or find your own transportation?
Well, and the other thing of it is too, like, kind of going back to Magical Express, like, the part that really gets me is Disney went from like the whole parking thing, right? Like that whole parking thing happened. And now they're going to put people in a position where you have to rent a car and then also pay for parking. And like all of the things that come with this aren't just like you're losing a bus system from the airport. It feels like they're kind of adding more little things in, you know?
I wonder if that was like on their plans all along was, hey, let's add the parking fee first so that it doesn't look like we're forcing people to pay it when we force them to rent a car.
I
Hmm.
I want to say
I
no.
don't know. I hope they're not that nefarious, but I don't know if I'd put it past them.
Well, and then that's the other thing of it too is like he there's so many unforeseen fees that start to add up with stuff like that. Like, okay, yeah, you now rent a car at the airport, which $300 for the week long stay that you're there, or whatever. Um, you rent the car. Okay, well now you have to pay for gas, which hopefully you plan for. But then on top of that, if you want to go to the parks, you're gonna have to pay for parking. Okay, well, I mean, unless you take the Disney transportation, which at this point, like, you have the car, why are you waiting on Disney transportation? Unless it's, for the fact that it's free, it's just like there's so many little things here that just it seems more and more like they're grabbing at they're nickel and diming you, right? Like that's what it seems like. And I get it because they're hurting, but I don't know. It makes the vacation feel less magical.
Yeah, and I mean,
Yeah.
like just the parking fee in and of itself, that's an extra, even if you're at a value, that's an extra $100
Yeah.
for a week. It's ridiculous.
Well, and then maybe I said this to you guys. I don't remember if I did, but part of the reason that I love Disney, like part of the reason that I get so excited about planning a Disney vacation is because there isn't much planning involved outside of what you expect, right? Like we know about fast passes, and if I don't want to partake in that, then like it doesn't necessarily hurt my trip because I go so often. The dining reservations, like, yeah, I have to plan those so far out, but at the same time, like, okay, I'm prepared for that. The fact that like now I'm gonna have to not only am I gonna have to find a way from the airport to my resort, I'm gonna have to wait at the baggage claim for my bags. I'm gonna have to deal with all of the issues that come with that. Like, we had an issue once where someone in my family's luggage got lost when we had gotten to the resort. Like everybody else got their luggage, somebody else's luggage got left at the airport, but it was because it got lost in the airport. Disney handled all of that for us. And obviously they only handled it because at this point, like, how are we going to get back to the airport? We don't have a vehicle. We don't have anything there. Like, you know, all of these unforeseen things start popping up because you're not, the logistics of it aren't as easy as they were before. And that's where, like, for me, we talk all the time about these things that, like, maybe are a deal breaker on a Disney vacation. And, like, for me, if they don't have these systems in place that make my vacation less stressful, it almost feels like what's the point for paying the premium for that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I agree.
becoming harder and harder to convince myself to stay on property.
Yeah. I think, the other thing that I've talked about a little bit in our Discord maybe was like I I've been looking at Universal hotels just because like some of them look really nice. Like Portofino Bay looks really pretty.
Mm-hmm.
And I
It's beautiful.
right, and I've thought about staying there, but the idea for me is like, well, if I go to Universal, it's not going to be a Universal trip. It's going to be primarily a Disney trip with a couple days of Universal added on. Well, now, what's the difference in that? Because I'm still going to have to pay to park a car somewhere. Like all of the things that would push me to stay on property are slowly disappearing.
Yeah. And the problem also right now, especially like with the whole coronavirus going on, is that if all of this was happening and coronavirus wasn't a thing, then I might still be able to convince myself, well, I still want to stay at Port Orleans because then I can go watch Yeehaw Bob every night. Or I can do the like activities at the pool or the trivia or do the like movie Under the Stars, which I know that they do still have a couple of activities going on at the resorts, but like the main entertainment and activity schedules are so small now. Like
Yeah.
it's you don't even get the value of the ambiance that you used to right now.
That's the other thing that gets me too, right? Like I hate to say this because it sounds so like tinfoil hat-y, but I feel like COVID was such an excuse for Disney, right? Like I feel
Oh,
like
it's an excuse for a lot of businesses for sure.
right, and that's the thing that's like really starting to kind of I guess wear down on me is the discussion of like, okay, Disney is a business and they do have to do things to compensate for losses and things like that. And yes, the travel industry really got hurt by the coronavirus. But at the same time, Disney was so quick to do a lot of these things. Like this one, yeah, it's coming a little late in the game. And yeah, the fast passes are coming a little late in the game. Like I can probably justify those. But it feels like Disney used the coronavirus as an excuse to get rid of a lot of things that weren't necessarily profitable for them. And if they don't turn around after like, things start to finally return to normal and things don't start to bounce back, like that's where it's really going to be interesting to see what happens, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
The world goes back to normal and a Disney vacation still looks like it did during coronavirus. Like how many people are actually going to want to book a Disney vacation?
Yeah.
Such a negative
Well, with
thought.
all that being said, let's talk about the topic that is
let's
not
talk about
the same vibe at all.
Let's talk about the things that will make people still come to the parks.
Yeah.
There we go.
So I honestly don't know where this topic came from because it's been on here for a little bit, but we had on our topic sheet the idea of what makes a classic Disney attraction. And I guess whoever put this on there or submitted this to us,
thank you.
Yeah,
Sorry that we didn't write your name down.
Thank you, but also
let us know and we'll give you a shout out on the next one.
I'm assuming this probably also came out before this attraction opened, but the talk was we all know that a lot of the iconic Disney attractions are the ones that have been around for a long time, but a lot of people have been saying that Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway is a classic attraction. But what really makes it, or any attraction in that matter, a classic attraction?
Ooh.
So
See,
yeah,
this is interesting to me because I have like a couple of theories about what I really think makes a classic attraction, and I have not ridden the Mickey Minnie's Runaway Railway yet. But from the couple of things that I've heard, it seems like they still meet these requirements. So I'm curious now, Beth, you've done it, right?
Yes.
But you haven't, Mario?
I have not. I've seen things on it, and I feel like I've gotten the general gist of what it's trying to do, but I haven't experienced it, so I can't say if it is or isn't.
Okay, so I'm curious to see if the things that I say about attractions that I have been on that I consider classics fit on this too.
It's really interesting that you say that because I also have some criteria, and I feel like Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway fits into a couple of them, but not most, like in the essence of a classic. So let's get into the details.
Okay. I kind of just thought this was going to be like a discussion type of thing, so I came super underprepared, as per usual. So I guess we could just kind of dive into it and talk about things. I mean, I think the biggest one specifically for me is like the nostalgia factor. As weird of an opening as that is, like how connected are you to an attraction based off of what history you have with it, I think is what makes it a classic. I feel like classic
Mhm.
is a very like loose term for a lot of people.
That I mean,
Yeah, that's interesting.
I think nostalgia plays a big factor in a lot of things. But this is something that I was thinking about. Like how it's so hard to remove nostalgia, like your own personal nostalgia from it. So what I tried to think about was, okay, if it's a real classic, then it will be nostalgic for multiple generations. So I tried to think about attractions that I saw my parents really like when we were going to the parks that I also really liked as a child and I still like now, to try to like remove just my own personal nostalgia from the criteria.
You know,
That's a really good point. I think it's also interesting to think about for newer attractions, will this be a classic? Like, will people be nostalgic for this?
Hmm.
You know?
that's such a
Like, we
hard
can't
one.
really say right now because there are a lot of new things going on, and we won't know until time has passed if we're nostalgic for it or not, obviously.
That's such a hard one to like identify too. You're right. It's weird to think about like the future of attractions because how do we know? Like what do you think is an attraction? Actually, I have one in mind. What is a recent attraction for you guys that you think is going to end up being a classic? I guess recent being like last 5 to 10 years ish.
Hmm. That's a good question. Um, I, I was actually thinking on the other end of that about what attractions that I thought are big now but will not be considered classics.
Ooh,
Oh, yeah. I feel like that's a much easier question to
Yeah.
answer.
yeah.
Um,
Well,
so
s-
the
I was just
one
gonna
that
say
I
one of the
had, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say the one that I thought of like as a classic. I guess I also didn't realize it opened a little bit longer than I thought it did. But like Midway Mania or Toy Story Mania now, I guess, is one that I think of that could be considered a classic because of like the interactiveness of the attraction. Like I also think classic as innovative and inspiring for other things because a lot of the older attractions that have laid like the footwork for different things in the future, um and I think like Midway Mania definitely or Toy Story Mania definitely is one of the like more interactive on ride experience attractions, and that's definitely helped a lot of other attractions in the future. So I think something like that would be a more recent classic. But
That's good. I hadn't really thought about Midway Mania, but I 100% agree with that.
I don't know if I agree though, because I feel like one of my things that I was thinking of in terms of what makes a classic is, will the technology stand the test of time? And I wonder if that will in that case, like, will it start to, I know that it's like the same kind of style as Toy Story, but if you go back and watch the old Toy Story, that even looks like, not saying that it looks bad. Obviously, that's a classic movie, like a classic Pixar movie, but you can tell how much it's aged.
yeah.
And I wonder if that will become the case and make it not necessarily a good way. You know what I mean?
Well,
Well,
in that
Like,
sense, would you
I think,
consider like maybe Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger Spin a classic in that
oh
regards?
no, definitely
Because
not.
I think of the two, that's one that's more likely to hold up, like technology wise.
Well, I definitely agree with that, but I also feel like it's hard to it's hard for me to think of that as a classic because of the kind of gamey nature of it.
Yeah, that's fair.
And not to say that a classic attraction can't have interactivity or anything. I just feel like because of the interactive nature of it, there's not enough storytelling. And I feel like storytelling is a big factor of a classic attraction.
Right.
that's true.
I also think that there are attractions that do the gamey aspect better than that. Like I'm gonna get so much flack for this, but I think that Men in Black in Universal does that a lot better than Disney does because it doesn't have the 3D feel in it and it's a lot more practical. Where like Buzz Lightyear kind of has that, but there are things that will definitely show its age with that attraction. Like the Buzz being a screen projected face is enough.
Mm-hmm.
I will say I wouldn't consider anything with a screen for a face a classic attraction, no matter how far we go into that in the future.
Yep,
Yeah.
that wraps
I
perfectly
think that's safe
into
to say.
yeah, one of my biggest criteria was usage of practical effects over, screen or digital technology.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same rule for movies, a halfway decent practical effect holds up so much better than even a very good for the time digital effect over time.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that's easy to see in so many attractions across the park.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. That's actually pretty much what I had put for one of my criteria was craftsmanship. The like you said, the usage of practical effects over digital effects. And also tying into that, I think that it's important to have effects that make you wonder like how did they do that?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Like Pepper's ghost is something that I feel like looks still as good today as it did when it was first incorporated. And unless you look up how the effect is made, you're not going to realize. You know what I
No,
mean?
and it's the perfect example of this. I mean, I don't know of a single other effect on an attraction that's held up so well. I mean, it's
Yeah.
still I honestly still hear people all the time, refer to it as a hologram or something like that, and it's not. And
Mhm.
it's so funny like knowing how it works, how simple the actual effect is and how futuristic and advanced it looks. And it's not even for its time when the attraction first came out, it was ancient technology. It's
Right.
so cool to know that that works so well.
Well, and
Yeah.
I want to deviate from this a little bit here because I agree with both of those things. But I will say one attraction that I very much consider a classic doesn't have really either of those incorporated. Um, well, I guess practical effects mostly. But I will say I think wonder is kind of what hits the nail on the head, right? Like that's a big one. And I think for this one specifically, because I'm thinking Dumbo, right? Dumbo is a classic attraction. There's no practical effects, but like how many little kids get off of that attraction and are just so happy? Um, obviously that is a nostalgia thing, but I think like the childlike wonder or viewing it through the lens of, I guess technically its target audience and seeing where it lands is also a big thing too.
Yeah. That's a really good point, and I think that's a good criteria is to go back to the whole like you said a sense of wonder that it gives you even if it's not necessarily practical effects per se.
Well,
If you get off the ride feeling that type of way.
I think it's two sides of the same coin. It's being able to give somebody an experience without having to rely on, advanced technology. Like this simple feeling of flying, even in such a, uh, for an adult, like mundane way on a Dumbo attraction, like for a kid, like that's probably the first time they've ever had that sensation of flying through the air, So
Yeah.
it
Mhm.
works. It doesn't have to be some advanced technology if it works and it gives the experience that you want to have.
Yeah. I do want to go back to Brian's question though of things that are modern attractions that we don't think are going to hold up because we never really answered that. And I don't want to stray too far away from that.
Ooh, so
As much as I love it, Flight of
that
Oh
was
Passage.
my
yeah.
exact one. Is it's so good now for all the reasons that we're stating. Things will not hold up to be classic attractions. This is
Right.
the relies 100% on the advanced technology to give you the experience, and when that does not become a unique thing across theme parks, it's not going to hold up.
Mhm.
I also feel like I don't think that there's really in the last couple of years there isn't an attraction that to me I think really would fall into my criteria for classics. But I also think that that's the nostalgia goggles. Like going back to my first point of like how much nostalgia you feel for something. It's hard to say like
I
new things would be a classic.
Yeah, I feel the same. I feel like we were saying, time will tell, I guess, as far as the things that have come out recently, whether or not they'll be classics. But I feel like if we had to pick something that is potentially going to be a classic that's come out within the last 5 or 10 years, I would say like maybe Journey of the Little Mermaid or like
Yeah,
Seven Dwarfs Mine Train.
I
I
would
would
hardly
say
say.
Seven Dwarfs over Journey of the Little Mermaid, but I
Yeah, that's
think
even
But like
stretching it
that
too.
same, yeah, I don't really feel like they definitely don't fit into the same category as what we consider classics currently. But I feel like if we had to say something's going to be a classic, what is it? Those would be the ones I would gravitate towards.
Okay, I have an idea. Touring Plans has a list of attractions by opening dates. I'm gonna pull all of those up, and we can go through each park and go like a couple
ooh,
years span and see if we think that they will be classics or if they can be quantified as classics. Maybe let's save that towards the end of the show and talk about that. Just to kind of get our criteria out of the way. But I think that might be a fun way to end this show.
Okay.
I like that.
Anywho,
I'm also kind of curious as to what attractions you guys consider classics aside from the obvious. And I guess by aside from the obvious, all I mean is Haunted Mansion because that's the
I
obvious to me.
well, I
That's
think like
definitely an obvious one.
I think Pirates is also an obvious one too. Like that's
Yes.
True, true.
even Tiki Room. I would say I think that's a classic. I mean,
Mhm.
honestly, I hate to say this, but if it has a place in Magic Kingdom, it almost usually falls in there just because like that is the classic park.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point. I would say I would agree that a lot of the attractions in Magic Kingdom are classics in my mind.
The
It's
one
funny. I had like 4 that I like really considered classics that would meet the criteria that I set for things being a classic, and yes, they are all located within Magic Kingdom.
I mean, I also think okay. I also think that well, Great Movie Ride would have been considered a classic for me, but that's gone. I think Spaceship Earth is a classic attraction for me.
For
Like
sure.
that's a really big one.
At least until they refurbish it.
Well, and even then, I think Spaceship Earth has been refurbished enough and has still maintained its classicness, right? But
Yeah.
that's I don't know.
As long as it keeps the essence of Spaceship
Yeah.
Earth.
Yeah. And that's another thing too. Like, does it do what it has tried to do for so long, or has the attraction changed its identity? Because
Mhm.
I mean, you could easily go um and say like, original Journey into Imagination was a classic, but the new one is definitely not.
Right, cuz it strays so far from the essence.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Do you guys think they're like what about Hollywood Studios or Animal Kingdom today? Like the attractions they have currently?
Well, so that's
I
hard, right? Because none of them are opening day attractions. Well, I mean,
Technically Pirates isn't an opening day attraction either, Mario.
yeah, but Pirates opened so long ago that I feel like that's beyond the criteria of being an opening day attraction. Hollywood Studios is still new park in a way.
I wonder what's the time period? Like how much time has to pass for it to be able to be considered a classic at all?
um, I don't know, but so that kind of goes to the point that I was going to go with Hollywood Studios, right? So my thing with a classic attraction and the time that it has to be open, part of it is like does it feel like it's dated for the time that does it feel dated for now if it came out a while ago?
That's
And
good.
I look at a lot of the attractions in Hollywood Studios, and a lot of them, if they're still there, are either showing their age. Yeah, they might be fun, but they're not like I don't know. They're not I don't think they'll stand the test of time in another couple of years. And I hate to say that because, like, you know, you could say Rock and Roller Coaster or Tower of Terror is a classic for some people, and I know Kirsten would fight me on this when I say it, but do we honestly think that they'll be there in a couple of years?
I
Tower of
would
Terror,
Tower
I
of Terror,
think.
yes, but not Rock and Roller Coaster.
But will
Yeah,
it
I don't
stay-
consider Rock and Roller Coaster a classic, but I would consider Tower of Terror a classic.
I mean, I
Yeah.
would also consider Muppet Vision a classic too, but that's not going to last long.
Don't say that.
Don't speak it
I mean,
into existence.
I love Muppet Vision, but again, I have to take off my Muppet fan / nostalgia glasses and look at it from, this is going to sound bad, but like, you know, the normal person perspective, like the lay person, the not
The peasants.
yes, the not highly educated of Disney and Muppet philosophy people. But you know, but I know Muppet Vision seems dated for a lot of people. I still love it, but I don't think that a lot of people that go to Hollywood studios consider it a classic.
And
No. What? Okay, so this is a little bit of a side note, but when did PhilharMagic open? I'm looking it up.
Here I have my
Like
2003.
early 2000s, wasn't it?
It's
Yeah.
2000.
2003.
Yeah,
And Muppet Vision opened in 1991. I feel like PhilharMagic shows its age much worse
I agree
because I think it has a lot to do with the fact that PhilharMagic is like entirely animated almost, and Muppet Vision is, and it's entirely 3D as well, but Muppet Vision is mostly live action ish stuff with only a few really strong 3D effects.
So
You know what I mean?
yeah. So here's another maybe bit to add to our criteria here is how does it stack up against other things of its type? Because I mean, if you want to go as far as to compare 3D attractions, like bring in It's Tough to Be a Bug, and then out of the three of them, effects wise and like practicality wise, as much as I hate to say it, PhilharMagic still is at the bottom of that rung. Not that
Oh, absolutely.
Not that I would say that It's Tough to Be a Bug is a better attraction than PhilharMagic, but like all of the practical effects in both that and Muppet Vision are significantly better than what PhilharMagic is doing anyway.
That's true. Yeah.
That said, I wouldn't say It's Tough to Be a Bug is a classic attraction.
No,
definitely
no.
not.
I think it's a little sad how much hate It's Tough to Be a Bug gets compared to PhilharMagic. But I guess it's a different concept. It's not as fantasy.
Well,
It's more educational and bugs.
my issue with Tough to Be a Bug is if you take the Hopper animatronic out of it, that feels like something that could have been slapped into any run-of-the-mill theme park.
Yeah.
Like,
No, I
Yeah.
agree with that. 100% agree with that. That's why I wouldn't consider it a classic by any means.
Yeah, for sure. So, is there a classic? So, we established Hollywood Studios that we can generally agree that Tower of Terror is a classic.
Yeah, I would say it's a classic, but I also think I don't think there's anything. All right, it's a classic in the Hollywood Studios sense of a classic because there isn't much to consider a classic there. But I think in terms of like other attractions, I don't know if I would consider it a classic.
So, you wouldn't put it in the same category as like Haunted Mansion or Pirates, or you wouldn't say that it's like a brother or sister in that sense?
I don't think so because what makes it a classic? Like what defines it as a classic attraction? Like what
I
of
mean,
the
I feel like it meets a lot of the stuff. It uses
Me too.
practical effects that I believe still hold up today. The whole going into the Twilight Zone, I know it's a scrim. I know that's how they do it, but it still works for me every time they do it. And again, I think that it holds up. The effect holds up. You know,
But I also
um,
think that a lot of those things aren't what people think of the attraction. Like that's when I think of Tower of Terror, my main thought is the drops. Like that's all I'm gonna think about with it.
That's like not even half the attraction,
Yeah,
though.
and I would
Right.
say, like we've talked about this before, about like how much the queue and the pre-show builds up to the drops. That like every time I go on, and even today, like my heart is always pounding more, like as I'm getting on the ride than I think actually experiencing the drops, because they build up the suspense so much to it. So
Right.
I really do. I think I would consider Tower of Terror a classic
I
for a
would
lot of those reasons.
I would too. And another one of the criteria that I kind of touched on earlier that I put into my notes as far as considering stuff classics is storytelling and world building,
Mhm.
which, like you were kind of hinting at, the closer you get to the building, the like, you start off and everything looks kind of normal, and the closer you get, it's all like starts to fall apart, and the building, like the gates are crumbling and stuff like that. And even if you're not like consciously taking note of those things, I feel like your brain is still seeing them out of the corner of your eye,
Yeah.
and it keeps adding that suspense. And like I think it's important also for a classic to have a story that's accessible to most people.
Yeah.
That's like easy to understand, but it also has enough depth that you can interpret more from it than like the base level plot. Like if you want to look into a backstory or Easter eggs or more details, like you can find those, but the average guest is also going to enjoy it, as much.
Yeah, that's fair. Like I said, I think it is a classic in some senses. For me it's hard to put it on like the scale of Haunted Mansion or Pirates. I also think classic is very excuse me. I think classic is very subjective too.
It can
Yeah.
be. And so the only thing that I would say kind of bumps Tower of Terror maybe slightly below something like Haunted Mansion or Pirates was like a criteria that I was trying to think about, similar to what Beth was talking about with the storyline and everything. But for me, it I was trying to think of a good way to phrase this, and the only thing that I could think of was having a plot without reading a script. Like I want to be on an attraction that I can go on multiple times, that I can re-ride, because there is a plot line, but it's not cut and dry, and I'm experiencing the same thing every time. So like an example for me of a ride that has a good plot line, but it is kind of following a script, is Dinosaur. Like
Yeah.
it's very straightforward what happens each time you go on the ride. And it's a
Mm-hmm.
good attraction. It was an e-ticket when it came out. I don't think people would really consider it an e-ticket now. And I think a lot of that has to do with, okay, every time you go on this, you're riding the same ride over and over again. Whereas something
Mm-hmm.
like Haunted Mansion or Pirates, they're more building a world that you're getting put in. And as you look around, there's different stuff. There's so much stuff going on. There's so much different things to look at as you go through it. You're not just following the script of what the attraction does each and every time.
That's fair. I will say that makes sense in regards to what we're talking about too. So, any other criteria or anything we want to talk about?
Well, I also had a criteria as passion. When you can tell that there was love and care put into the attraction, you can tell that there's like a lot of detail. It goes into with the ambiance and the music composition and the story, and like we were saying, with the storyline, and you can kind of tell that the attraction was a labor of love rather than feeling forced or like born out of necessity. Like for the example that I put was Haunted Mansion versus Frozen Ever After. Frozen Ever After seemed like very forced. We need a people eater. We need to break up the crowd between this point and this point in World Showcase. This is a popular, IP that we have. Let's pop it in there. Whereas Haunted Mansion, especially if you go back and look at the history as in depth as we have, you can tell that this was a labor of love. This was people putting their passion into this.
Mm-hmm.
And that, like, all of the models and the scenes in Haunted Mansion are like crafted meticulously and uniquely, as opposed to just like Frozen Ever After, where it's like throw a costume on an animatronic and projection map the face.
Yeah,
Now,
that's a very good point.
It's sincerity, like you can feel it, the sincerity.
with that said, and I'm gonna make a lot of people angry asking this question, would you
What's new, Mario?
what would you consider like Rise of the Resistance a classic attraction in a couple of years?
No.
And the reason I
I don't
ask that is
know.
because I feel like it's hit a lot of the criteria that you've asked. Like you've asked of a classic, but I think that last one is the biggest one for me. It was almost born out of a necessity. And I think the necessity being that Disney wanted nothing to do with the original Hollywood studios.
But I feel like, and this is not a criteria that I put down, but one that kind of just popped up is like timelessness. You know, I feel like Rise of the Resistance does hit pretty much all of the criteria that I have already said, but is a matter of, are people going to care about that story in 20 years?
Yeah.
You know, I feel like if it were a ride based on the original Star Wars trilogy, then that would be a different conversation, because obviously it has been 30 however many years since those came out and people still care. But there's so much, I don't know, so much hate in a lot of ways for the newer films, which is what Rise of the Resistance is based on, obviously, that I wonder if people will still feel like a connection to that story in 20 or 30 years.
That's a good point. I don't think it's going to. I haven't even done
Yeah.
Rise of the Resistance, but I just know how divisive the newest trilogy of Star Wars movies has been. So it's hard for me to believe people are going to care that much in a couple of years.
I agree.
Yeah.
I would 100% agree with that. And the reason I brought that up is because I wouldn't personally say that. I think it's hit a lot of the criteria that we've asked of a classic attraction, but I also think it's just missed the mark on all of them enough that it's like you can say it doesn't necessarily fall in there, right? But I also feel like something like that, while yes, it's new and obviously we're looking at things through like a classic lens, I think the technology in Rise of the Resistance, I mean, yeah, a lot of it seems new and innovative, but there are places that's been done before, right? Like a lot of those practical effects stem from other attractions.
I will say that I think Rise of the Resistance will hold its own for a longer time because of how much practical effects were utilized,
Yeah.
rather than using a bunch of screens. So it definitely is going to benefit from that. But like I said, I don't think it will meet the bar for being a classic.
I agree.
So back to the original, like the whole reason that this got introduced was people are saying that Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, is it a classic? And neither of you have ridden it, right?
Nope.
So I guess I'm not gonna I'm gonna try not to spoil anything, and I guess I'll kind of just be, old man yells at cloud, because I don't have an audience of people that have ridden it too. But I don't think it's a classic. I don't think it will be a classic. And I think the main reason is because it doesn't utilize enough practical effects. It has a ton, almost entirely, projection mapping. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, so that's an interesting thing to too, right? Like a lot of new attractions depend on things that aren't practical effects. Do we feel like there is a space for practical effects in the future in terms of attractions?
Oh, for
Yeah,
sure.
it's just whether or not Disney is going to put in the time and effort it takes to make them work, you know?
Right. Well, that's what I mean. Like, obviously, there is a fan space for them because we're crying at Disney constantly to do things like that. Like the things that work, but like, do you think that Disney has a space for those practical effects? Do we think that we're still at a point where we're going to get stuff like that, or is am I taking my old man yells at clouds moments where where I'm
No,
like,
I
well,
honestly think Disney is still putting in an effort and putting out new dark rides, and I think the what's always been what makes the dark rides are the animatronics, and I think we're gonna have this era that we're gonna look back at in 10 to 15 years if the attractions are still around that have these practical effects and go, ugh, like it's gonna look like old cheesy hairstyles from the 80s, you know? It's just gonna be like, oh, why did anybody think that looked good? You know, and then I think we're eventually gonna just move back to higher end animatronics. Like we see, we see some one here and there really good ones placed into newer attractions, and I think they're going to come full circle and come back to the high tech animatronic like figures.
I agree, and optimistically, obviously, hope for that because if you look at the Beauty and the Beast ride that came out in Japan, it's like that has a lot of animatronics and really nice animatronics in it.
Mhm.
So, and it's gotten a ton of positive feedback for that reason. And if you look at, what I'm assuming the Ratatouille ride that's going to be opening soon is going to be a lot of practical effects because you're supposed to be mouse sized or whatever, right?
uh,
And
have you seen ride-throughs of the version that's overseas?
no,
Okay. Not to burst your bubble, but
is it a lot of projection mapping?
have you done Spider-Man at Universal?
Yes.
It feels very much like that from what I've seen. It's not projection mapping, at least the one obviously we don't know because it's not it could be a completely different attraction than the one that's over there, but like the one that they have is practical set pieces with screens kind of like a Navi River journey.
Okay. I don't love that, but
I
I
think it
guess it's better than not having any practical set
Yeah.
pieces in general.
I will say, I mean, from the ride throughs that I've seen now, obviously, again, I haven't actually been on the attraction. I don't know for personal sake. But from what I've seen of that, it works for what they're trying to do because, like, obviously, the things I would say, honestly, a lot of the things in Navi River Journey that are screen stuff works really well because it's
Mhm.
surrounded by practical effects. And I think that
Mhm.
that's
Yeah.
where it kind of works better than say something like I don't know. I haven't ridden Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, but from the concept, I feel like it probably works better in that regards because there is still that practical piece.
Well, and it's the same
Yeah.
thing with like going back to a movie example. If you look at a CGI character placed into a real set, even today, I mean, like if you look at even a movie that did that a couple years back, and looking at a movie today that uses like a fully CGI environment with a CGI character, it looks horrible. Like the newer
Mhm.
stuff looks horrible. So having some type of real practical setting placed in there is always going to help the either the screen projection or the CGI characters or just the screen work better with the attraction.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that I'm optimistic for it. I uh I like the Spider-Man ride at Universal and I think that it does what it's supposed to do well. I also think that maybe that is because it's not I don't know, there's like this very different level of Spider-Man obviously and Ratatouille are completely different things, but I feel like hopefully they can wrap it all together if that's the route that they took, but I also kind of have hope that because of how popular Rise of the Resistance was, that maybe they'll have incorporated more practical effects and more practical set pieces than the sister attraction or whatever in Paris. But I mean, another ride that I feel like does it pretty well is the Harry Potter ride at Hogwarts. Where it's mixing practical and screens. But I will say that the screens are probably my least favorite part.
Yeah.
It's not bad though. It's just I guess all boils down to what is most financially feasible. It's how they build what they build.
Yeah.